Middle of a series called the 10 Commitments. The reason why we're looking at 10 commitments, we're thinking of commitments, not our commitments to God, but God's commitments to us. And the reason why we're looking at that is a statement that we've been making every week. Before we can keep God's commandments, we must believe that God can keep His commitments. Before we can keep God's commandments, we must believe that God can keep His commitments to us. We're on the last of the commitments. God gives me the power to be content. Look at the verse. It's a longer verse. It's one that's going to be a little more difficult to memorize. It says, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. We'll pause for an adjustment. I was just kidding. God gives me the power to be content. Why don't you say it after me? We'll break this verse up into several different phrases. It's a wonderful verse. It will benefit those who memorize it. Let's say it together. I have learned the secret. Say it together. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. God gives me the power to be content. Okay, we'll pause for just one more break. How are we doing, Spence, in terms of sound? Are we doing okay sound-wise? Not good, is it? Should we keep on rolling? Sure, we'll keep on rolling. Do your best. We've been messing. We got new equipment. We're getting used to. It will get better. We have the things in place. Now it's just a matter of using the things and setting them so that we can get better sound. The secret of being content, contentment comes from receiving strength, not stuff. When we think of contentment, we often think of getting what we want. There's things that we really would like to have. And when we have what we want, we associate that with contentment. What we find in the Bible is contentment doesn't come from receiving stuff. It comes from receiving God's strength. We're going to talk about the source of contentment, and then we're going to talk about the signs of discontentment. Talk about the source of contentment. Contentment is what everyone is looking for. We're all looking for the same thing, contentment. Now, we might look in different places. We might use different means, but all of us are looking for the same thing, aren't we? We're looking for contentment. We're looking to have enough of what we want, and again, we want different things, but we're all looking to have enough of what we want. What we find from Paul is that it's possible even to find contentment in prison. Look what it says in this verse that we've read, Philippians 4:12 and 13. We'll pause for one more break. We are practicing Okay. Now, Nate doesn't look content. We might have to try the other one. I'll keep talking, and so bear with me. I'm content. The verse, when Paul writes this, he's writing from prison. In fact, listen to what he says. I rejoice greatly in the Lord. This is from Philippians 4. It comes right before the verse that you have, so listen to the context. What comes directly before the words that you read? It says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. Paul found contentment in prison. He's imprisoned as he's writing these words. Contentment is about enough. That's what it means. Contentment is about having enough. He's imprisoned. These people to whom he's writing sent him money. And he wants to express to them, thank you for the money, but he also wants to assure them that I would have been fine had you not sent it to me. Can you hear me? We doing okay here? I wonder if laughing at you know what just happened. You laughed at me, and who got back at you? Yeah, you remember that. Okay. Hey, you got to admit, I'm doing pretty good through all this. I'm staying pretty even. Thank you. Okay. You can find contentment in prison. No, that's really what's happening as Paul's writing. He gets financial gifts from people and he wants to thank them for giving them the gifts. But he also doesn't want them to believe that their gift makes his day. What Paul wants them to understand is that he's learned to be content in whatever the situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. He says, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And he took a lot of heat for this. Paul was very self-sufficient. He was a tent maker. He didn't want to have to rely on the financial gifts of others. And he was accused of not being able to charge for his services because his services were substandard. So he stuck to his guns because he wanted to model to people that when you have a relationship with Christ and learn to experience his strength. Now you remember he says, I have learned the secret of being content. It doesn't come naturally. And he had learned
to get to a place where if his plate was full or empty, if the cupboard was full or empty, he could experience a sense of contentment that was not based on what he had. When we think of being content, we identify several sources having what we want to have. Look what it says in the worship folder, James 4:2. James says, you want something but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. It says the basic problem with these people, and they're having problems within a church context, and he points at the conflict that is occurring between them. They're fighting with each other. This group is fighting with that group. That group is fighting with that group. And what James does is he says, why? And he points it back to the reason why there's conflict is not because of what's happening between you, but what's happening within you. There are desires within you that are battling and competing. And because you can't win this battle ends up being waged. So, here's what it says. What's the source of fights and quarrels between us? What he would indicate is the problem begins within us. To the inner conflict, the inner tension that we experience. What it says in Galatians, down in the next verse under letter B, it says, so I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. For the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. We have two sets of desires. You can't have what you want because you is two. Let me say that again. You can't have what you want because you is two. There are two sets of desires at work within you and at work within me. That's what the verse indicates. There's the Spirit and what's called the sinful nature or the flesh. These are opposed to one another so that you can't do what you want. And again, not to beat this to death, but I'll apply it to me. Me is not one set of desires. Me is two sets of desires. There's me with the Spirit generating spirit desires. Then there's another me called the sinful nature or the flesh generating another set of desires. Now the problem is these two sets of desires that are both within me, they don't agree with each other. And that's the problem that we have. If we gratify one set of desires, now there's temporary relief because, gosh, finally I got what I want. And the relief is short-lived because at some point this other part of me is going to want its desires relieved as well. And if I cater to this set of desires, what's going to happen? That set of desires is going to start to act up. That's what ends up happening to us. And if you didn't know that, I'm describing what you and I deal with. It's like we're pulled in half. And that's why having what we want is not going to make us content because we want two different sets of things. And that's the problem. Not about just having what we want to have, doing what we want to do. It's the same thing. The same problem faces us. Not only do we want to have two different sets of things, we want to do two different sets of things. Look at that verse in Galatians again. And he's writing to people who have a relationship with Christ. These are not people who are bad. These are you and I people that he's writing to. People who are trying to be more authentic followers of Christ and who deal with separate desires. Look what he says. I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. For the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other so that, look what it says, you do not do what you want. And it's speaking to me and it's speaking to you. You do not do what you want. You know why? Because you is two. Two different sets of desires. And that creates a problem. So, Having what we want to have and doing what we want to do is a temporary source of contentment because we want two different sets of things. That leads to the third, believe what he wants you to believe. What it says, for we also have had the gospel preached to us, just as they did. But the message they heard was of no value to them, because those who heard did not combine it with faith. Now, we who have believed enter that rest. Rest is about having enough. It's a sense of that the tension subsides enough to allow us to relax. There is the possibility of relaxing. It's an option. But it doesn't come from having what you want to have or doing what you want to do. It comes from believing what he wants you to believe. Isn't that what he says? Now we who have believed enter God's rest. The basis of contentment is not collection. Now, we're going to get stuff, but ultimately, we are not going to be able to collect enough to sustain contentment. It just isn't going to work. It's not correction. We're not going to be able to change ourselves or change others to the degree necessary to enable us to remain content. It's just not possible because we want to have and do two different things. Connection is the source of contentment. Connection. Two kinds, human and divine. Human connection is the source of a sense of peace and rest. We like to be connected with one another. But not only human connection, divine connection. It says, we who have believed enter God's rest. Let's talk about discontentment. The signs of discontentment. Look at the verse. What causes fights and quarrels among you? That's a great question. That's easy, though, isn't it? If I were to ask you. Think of your fights and quarrels. What causes fights and quarrels in your house? I know what you'd say. Yeah, it's the desires that battle within me. Come on, it's not what you'd say. You say, she's pushy. He's lazy. My boss is a tightwad. What causes fights and quarrels among us? He doesn't listen. She talks too much. And what James says, he doesn't say any of those things. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Look what it says. Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? Isn't that interesting? That this conflict comes from this conflict. The desires that battle within us. The reason why we get angry with one another is because we can't make peace within ourselves. Why? Because we're trying to have what we want to have and do what we want to do. And that's not possible, so what do? Your fault. We get angry at one another. It says, you want something but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you can't have what you want. You quarrel and fight. Or do you think that the Scripture says without reason, the Spirit He caused to live in us envies intensely? Craving. It's another word for coveting. Coveting and craving are the same thing. It's like when I want something and my want is getting a little bit agitated. Pass the mashed potatoes. Pass the mashed potatoes. Pass the mashed. Now that gets to craving. Craving is an intense form of wanting. It's gone past the point of being polite. This is at the root of conflict. Think about what fuels wars. Where do wars come from? Couldn't you trace it to craving? I want that. You want that. And because we want different things, we go to war with each other. That's what James is saying. The wars that they're describing in this passage, though, they're holy wars. Not between Muslims and Christians, but these are holy wars within a Christian community. What they want is sacred, not secular. See, the people that are fighting in this place, they're not fighting over money. They're fighting over spiritual stuff. They want positions of spiritual influence. This is in church. That's where the conflict is brewing. And they are saying, oh, that person's not the right kind of teacher, and that person is not really helping out on Sunday morning. And what James says, where are these fights and quarrels coming from? Oh, him. He says, no, that's not really where they're coming from. It's coming from inside. The desires that are flaring up are desires that are heating up within a church. Their pursuit of God is fueled by the desire to get what they want and to do what they want. There is a sacred selfishness. There is a sacred selfishness. Selfishness can be secular. Money, power, authority. Can selfishness be sacred? That we come to God based on what we can get from Him because, as some would say, worship God and He'll give you what you want. You'll do what you want. You know what? That's a lie. Not true. I will never be able to have all that I want because even though God's Spirit is within me, I have the same struggle that you do. I'm pulled by two different sets of desires. Therefore, and we'll say this, tension is inevitable. That's not great news, but it's the truth. In fact, sacred selfishness, we call that goddishness. That kind of works, maybe. Goddishness. Sacred selfishness. It's when we come to a place and think that if we make our desires spiritual, God will give us whatever we want. We'll be able to do whatever we want to do. Goddishness. I don't think that works. God's resources do not enable us to end the tension. I'm going to say two things now that have really helped me. Not that I'm not tense, I am. But it's helpful. God's resources do not allow us to end the tension. God's resources enable us to endure the tension. If you develop a more authentic belief and a deeper belief in Jesus Christ, and it's a process. It's not all or nothing. It's not something that's going to fall on you. What will happen? You will not get everything that you want. I don't care how much you read the Bible. I don't care how much you pray. I don't care how much you serve. You will not get everything that you want. And you will not be able to do whatever you want. Because we still are pulled in half, and God will not cause the tension to go away. However, a firmer belief that He cares about you will enable us to endure the tension. The voices in our head will not be as loud. The sense of agitation will be something that we can tolerate, that we won't need to spit it out on other people. That is what God's resources do. They don't enable us to end the tension. They do enable us to endure it. And you know why I say that to some of you? Because some of you are tense and you're saying, Mike, what am I doing wrong? You know, I'm memorizing the verses. I'm thinking about God's commitments, but I still feel agitated. There's still a sense of tension. Join the club. Join the club. That's what it's like. However, as we know the commitments and believe them, the sense of agitation dissipates somewhat, becomes more tolerable. The signs of discontentment, craving, then there's contempt. Acute craving. When you crave something long enough, it becomes contempt. One illustration that I often talk is a mosquito bite. What happens if you get bitten by a mosquito? You know, naturally it itches. Stop itching that, it will get infected. So, stop it, it'll get infected. And so, that's like craving. Agitated craving becomes contempt. Contempt is like infected craving. It's when craving has existed for so long that we start to get angry because we don't have what we want. Intense envy, it says in the verse, the Scripture says that the Spirit He caused to live in us envies intensely. I want to talk about that word, intense envy. Another way to say that is contempt. What contempt is? It's not just craving something. It's when I want to make someone pay because I don't have what I want. Does that make sense? Think of Cain and Abel. That's the illustration that makes the most sense to me. They offer their offerings to God. One gets accepted and one doesn't. If we ask, stop the image right there, and freeze it and talk to both of them and say, let's start with Cain. Cain, what do you want? What he's going to say is, I wanted my offering to be accepted. And I don't understand why mine wasn't accepted, but Abel's was. But what I want is my offering to be accepted. But let's let the scene go on. Let's wait a day. And let's go back to talk to him after a day or two, when he stews on it. He thinks about it. Something dark starts to happen. If we ask him after a day or two, Cain, what do you want? Do you want God to accept your offering? He's gotten infected by this point, and what he's going to say is, he might not say it out loud, I want him to pay. Because I don't have what I want, and I want to make somebody pay because I don't have what I want. What it says, the Spirit He caused to live in us envies intensely. You and I have a spirit, the human spirit likes to do this. Now again, so if you move in the direction of blaming yourself or others for things you don't have, it's because that's what the human spirit does very well. The Spirit He caused to live in us does that. It longs to assign blame. So what we're going to have to do is find a way to resist it. Left to ourselves, we will find a reason to get mad at someone else because we don't have what we want. It's what we do well. Some of us pour contempt on ourselves. We say, I know what the problem is. If I was a better person, if I was a better son, if I was a better this or that, I'd have what I want. And we pour contempt on ourselves. And for some of us, if we telegraphed or put on audio the kind of inner dialogue that goes in our head, it would be scary stuff to listen to. Some of us, we say terrible things to ourselves. We like pour contempt on ourselves. Some of us, we don't get contemptuous at self. We get contemptuous at others. I don't have what I want, and it's your fault. If you were a better person, if you were a better this or that, then I'd have what I want. But the thing that we naturally do, we will blame someone. And we'll stick there rather than back up and say, you know what the deal is? I'm never going to have what I want. Not enough to be content long term. I'm never going to be able to do what I want to do enough to enable me to be content. We're hearing about the abortion issue. And as I've said before, speaking what I would like to see, I would like to see it, the amendment, the ban pass. I'd like to see this judgment, Roe versus Wade, go back to the Supreme Court. And if the ban is upheld somewhere, that's what will happen eventually. I think the ruling needs to be looked at. And in that sense, I hope that the ban passes so that we can look at it and come up with better legislation. And I'm going to say on the other side, though, I knew a woman who got involved in the abortion controversy, very pro-life. She felt very deeply. Nice person. Had conversation, and then she went full-time. Became the thing that she dove into. And I caught up with her a couple years later, and I didn't know her. She'd become very angry, very contemptuous. And she had all the right words. She had all the right lingo, wrapped herself in God's will, but had turned into a bitter, angry, contemptuous woman. And God was not pleased. We can wrap ourselves in God's causes, but I don't think God does it like that. When we pour contempt on self or others, I don't think that's God. Jesus, if there's anybody that knew good from bad, it was Jesus. Can you imagine being in the temple at age 12, knowing what the Father was like? Jesus, that's what the deal was with Jesus. He knew what the Father was like, and that's why he loved him. And he saw this religious institution built upon a God that he didn't know, because it wasn't the true God. And year after year, he has to watch people walk into this place, knowing that when they walked in, they were walking into the place that was furthest, that would bring them the furthest away from God than any place on the planet. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, watching people go in and out, knowing what was happening. Age 17, age 18, age 19, age 20. When's the green light? When can I make a difference? Not yet. 21, 22. And he's not becoming contemptuous. And he's not becoming bitter. He's waiting. He's grieving. Which I know some of you do. With the issue is hot and there's lives that are expended. Grief is an appropriate response with measured, reasonable action. But bitterness and contempt, Jesus didn't do it. 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, green light. Now he gets the opportunity to do something to bring about change. But he waited how many years? And what did he do in those years? He learned to quiet his heart based on what the Father said. He had to trust him that he was going to make a difference in what was happening. Craving, contempt, conflict. It's a cycle. It's like a whirlpool. We describe it when you watch the water go out of a bathtub. You know, at the top, the whirlpool is slow. The closer it gets, it spins faster and faster. I think that's what this is like. Craving, contempt, conflict. Craving, contempt, conflict, craving, and it goes faster and faster. How can we get out of this spiral? How do we get out of this? Craving, contempt, conflict. I think there's a way. Let's talk about 4 steps for dealing with tension. We'll close with this. Take out this yellow sheet. Got this? It should be in all your worship folders. I'm going to walk us through this. We're going to talk about this next week, too. We're going to kind of put a close on our series on the 10 Commitments. Start on the page where it talks. There's 4 things. I just want you to highlight them. First, know your heart. We'll talk about it briefly. Secondly, quiet your heart. Turn the page over. Third, down at the bottom, share your heart. Fourth, give your heart. We're going to continue to talk about this. We have talked and we'll continue to talk about it. If I could teach you 4 things, these would be them. To know your heart. And quiet your heart. And then share your heart with God and others in prayer. It's better to share your heart with God and others after you've quieted it. And that's why we're going to focus on quieting your heart. That comes first. And then give your heart. Some people talk to God in order to quiet their heart, but don't do that. Focus on His promises, and I'll show you what I mean. Sometimes we want to give our heart. We want to serve Him in order to feel better. Don't do that either. Know your heart. Quiet your heart first. Quiet. Be still. And know that He is God. Then share your heart with Him and others. And give your heart. How does this work? I want you to look at the verse, and then we're going to have communion, but I want you to look at what this says in Hebrews 13, 4 and 5. Marriage should be honored by all, the marriage bed kept pure. For God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have. Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. What it seems to be saying is that the answer to, listen to me. It's not that you weren't. It's going to be important. I think the answer to craving is to quiet our heart. Not to beat ourselves up. It says the basis of being able to not be sexually immoral is to know, be still. God says, I will never fail you or forsake you. What sexual immorality is about at its core? I need to have someone love me. Even though I know it's short-term, short-lived, it won't last, yet I've got to get someone to pay attention to me. Oftentimes that's what it is. And what God says is this, be still. I will never fail you or forsake you. getting that in our minds is ultimately the cure for any kind of craving. We're not going to be able to totally cure ourselves. But that is the solution. To move in the direction of believing what God says about us. He does. That's what He says to you. He will never leave you or forsake you. I'm talking to you. Yeah. You. He says, I will never leave you or forsake you. And when we believe that, you know what happens? Something gets quiet. Something gets quiet inside. Let's try it. Say your deal is, think of you have something you don't want to have. You don't have something you do want to have. Can you think about that? Can you get discontented? Easy. It might not be about having, it might be about doing. You're not doing what you want, or you're doing what you don't want. Let's try this. Let's try to work our way through this thing. Look at it. Read it along with me. Okay, and it kind of makes it so that you can have this dialogue with God. Follow along. Let's try it. And this is to direct towards God. Know your heart. I'm frustrated with my circumstances. I don't have what I want to have. I think authenticity is the foundation of the Christian life. Don't play games with them. It doesn't help to pretend. Say it. God, you know what? I have this job, and it's really not the job I want to have. I have this relationship, and I don't have what I want. Not only do I not have what I want, what it says, I am frustrated with my conduct. I do not do what I want to do. Some of us, that's our deal. We are not acting like we want to act. We see what we're doing, and we don't like it. And so step one is know your heart. Say it out loud to Him. God, I don't have what I want to have. I don't do what I want to do. I'm frustrated. Okay, what do you do next? After you know your heart, you touch your frustration. What comes next? Tell God what you want, right? Is that it? Share your heart with Him? Nope. You skipped a step. Quiet your heart. How would you do that? Let's read. And this is where you look at commitments. You look at His commitments to you. In the midst of my frustration, you say to me, be still and know that I am God. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. You start to tell yourself the things that God tells you, and stuff starts to quiet down a little bit. You want me to learn to live by faith, to base my confidence on what you say rather than on what I see. Even though I'm frustrated with my circumstances, you have not left or forsaken me. This is really critical. At this point, you're owning the things that you don't have, but you're not letting that pull you in the direction of believing that you've been abandoned. Even though I'm frustrated with my conduct, you will not fail or forsake me. Turn it over. And here's where the commitments come in. You want me to know and believe that you see me. All creation is hidden from God's sight. You sympathize with me. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. You deal gently with me. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray. You love me. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You see what's happening? You see me. I'm frustrated. You would have me base my confidence on what you say. You're not going to abandon or forsake me. You want me to know that you see me. You sympathize with me. You deal gently with me. You love me. You change me. You choose me. Good is ahead of me. Good is guaranteed to me. You give me the power to persevere. You give me the power to be content. And as these things roll in through your head, what happens? Something quiets inside. Keep on looking at the commitments. We still got a couple weeks to go. We're on day 28. You'll get that today. If you're not getting those, I'm giving an email every day that talks about one of the commitments so that we can be looking at them together, because knowing the commitments is the key to quieting our heart. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. We're going to do communion. Before we close in prayer, a couple things. If you'd like to get the daily email, it occurs to me I never told you how. You could just put your name on the flap on the worship folder, tear that off, and put it in the Hope mailbox. Give it to me, and we'll see that you get that. Thanks for your patience. I saw a lot of smiles out there. We're working hard. on this sound thing will continue to do so and make steps forward. But let me pray for us. Father, thank you for your commitments to us. I think they're so critical. We can't be in a place where we can get stuff and it feels good, and yet the impact of the goodness doesn't last, and that is what drives us crazy. Like, contentment is so elusive. We grab onto it and then it's gone. We get something we like and we step outside and somebody has something better and contentment has vanished. It's frustrating being immortal beings in mortal bodies. It's this conflict that we have. But thanks that you give us something that takes the edge. You tell us about your love. You tell us about commitments. And as we think about them, believe them, as the impact of them goes into us, it gives us a capacity to be quiet in the midst of tension, that's a great thing. Would you continue to teach us about this so that we can be more authentic followers of yours, so we can be more like Jesus? In his name we pray. Amen.